Hello fellow bird nerds, welcome back to another video talking all things parrot diet, and once again I'm joined by two wonderful guests today who have been on the channel before. We have Dr Jamie Abete, who is an avian vet, and we have my good friend Dr Jason Crean, who is a biologist, and we are going to be diving into all different topics when it comes to parrot diets. Things like pellets, fresh foods, what's safe and what isn't, and the different things that are coming up at the moment in avian medicine. So we're going to go through all those kinds of things today. But before we do, Jamie, even though you've been on the channel already, would you mind introducing yourself and what you do?
Sure. I'm Jamie Abete. I'm a veterinarian that focuses primarily on birds. I work at Niles Animal Hospital and Bird Medical Center, and most of what I see are parrots, and a lot of their illnesses are nutrition based. So this is one of my passions.
Fabulous. And Jason, even though you're pretty much in every other one of my videos, if somebody isn't familiar with your work, would you mind introducing yourself and what you do?
Sure. I'm always happy to be included. Thank you for educating people. My name is Jason Crean. I am a biologist. I teach animal nutrition, zoo biology, and other courses in the Department of Biological Sciences at St. Xavier University. I have an aviary where we have 40 different species, and we definitely see what benefits birds, and it's whole food. So we are studying the effects of processed food and what happens to food when it's processed, particularly animal feed, but we have a particular focus on bird nutrition in the lab. So
Fabulous. Well, thank you both for joining me today. I'm really excited to delve into a variety of topics. And we will get on to raw whole foods and natural foods and things like that a little bit later in the talk. But we wanted to start off with pellets because when you look at a lot of marketing, a lot of branding, pellets are seen as the gold standard of avian nutrition. It's kind of pellets are the way to go. Pellets are everything. If you aren't feeding pellets, that's a danger sign. And we're going to explore that today because quite often you'll see this kind of information being posted on social media. You'll see it from the marketing, and you may also hear it from your own avian vet as well, that pellets are the way to go and your bird should be eating up to 80%, sometimes even 100% of pellets. So we're going to start with Jamie. Why do avian vets recommend pellets as such a high portion of a parrot's diet? And is that really where we're kind of going in the future of parrot diets as well?
Sure. Well, vets ultimately recommend pellets because they got tired of seeing birds on all seed diets that were getting a lot of nutritional issues. That being said, birds on all pellet diets also seem to have some nutritional issues too. So I don't think that's the end all be all, but it is better than being on an all seed diet. Now, there is not one food that ever should be the entirety of a bird's diet, just like us. We shouldn't just have one thing and say, well, that's it. Pellets are essentially like eating a fortified cereal your whole life. It is better than eating French fries, but it's not going to be the best thing because there are some nutrients that you really just can't preserve well in pellets that stay, in their active form in a way that's bioavailable to the bird. So you still do get a lot of nutritional deficiencies. It is better than all seed, but there are better options like adding a lot of more fresh foods to the diet, particularly focused on veggies with, a good amount of fruits too.
Awesome. And when you went to vet school and vets in general, are they taught much about avian nutrition or nutrition in general? Is it mostly that they're taught that pellets are the best? Is it pellets because that's convenient? What's the kind of idea between what you've actually been taught in vet school?
Yeah, it is probably pellets because it's convenient. I mean, just like dog and cat food, we are taught that formulated diets are what is best to feed because most people aren't going to take the time to make an appropriate, well-balanced homemade diet. There's very little that we learn about bird nutrition in school. Essentially, they do kind of just say, well, it should be about 70% pellets and then the rest veggies. But that is kind of all you get because there's not a lot of bird nutrition in vet school. As far as dog and cat nutrition, there's one semester on nutrition, and then there's an additional elective semester that could be taken, but it is heavily focused on formulated diets, and also they focus on it being dangerous to make your own diet. It is only dangerous if you do it wrong, kind of thing with anything. But yeah, there's not a lot of bird nutrition in school.
Sure. And obviously that's concerning. I mean,
Yeah.
we want our avian vets to be recommending the best possible diet, but if that's the information they've been told, they can only go what they work with. And it's
Right.
about spreading different ideas and different ways of doing things. Because Jason, I'm sure you probably agree that how can one formulated food or a variety of these formulated foods meet the nutritional requirements of so many different species of parrot?
Yeah. And this is why I launched our animal nutrition program at the undergraduate level at the university so that our pre-vet students are more prepared to make some critical, how do I say this, thought out decisions as far as what they're taught in vet school, which is very narrow and often by pet food manufacturers and not actual professors. Um, so when it comes to um, a single formulated diet having everything the bird needs. And I often hear the myth that it fills all the gaps, um, or that fresh food addition to pellet food will throw off the balance. I've heard all of this before. I've heard it from PhDs too, though the studies are not there to really back that up whatsoever. But when it comes to this one size fits all diet, it doesn't work. We've seen lots of health problems with birds that are on a predominantly pelleted diet, just like Dr. Jamie says. And I'm a zoo consultant, so I'm working with a couple zoos right now specifically around the reduction or removal of pellets from bird diets, and we're seeing positive things. And a lot of it has to do with um, there was a study in 2021 published in the Royal Society specifically that looked at why not offering a predominantly pelleted diet. And it's not just physiological needs, nutrient needs, but it's also mental enrichment. And that they targeted citizens specifically and said, they definitely need a diverse diet to stave off boredom alone. So, when you look at most pellets, they're highly processed. Most are highly processed. They use synthetic vitamins, which is really no different than the powdered vitamins or the liquid vitamins I used as a kid with my cockatiels that turn the water yellow. It's really the same exact thing as that, but they sprayed on a corn, soy, wheat-based, nugget that will carry that vitamin to it. The pellet itself isn't really nutrient rich. It's what it's carrying. But we know that whole foods are the vitamins and minerals in whole foods are more assimilable, like they can absorb them and use them much more efficiently than synthetic isolate vitamins and minerals that you find in pellets. And years ago, I interviewed Dr. Stacey Gellis, who's a well-known avian vet in Australia, and he said the same thing. He's like, you can't, any reasonable person knows you can't get what you need from an isolate. You need it from a whole food. That's what all these animals have evolved to do, is extract nutrients from whole foods.
Yeah, definitely. And we see that in human medicine as well. And I'm not saying that we have to extrapolate everything because then everything gets muddled, but we're told as people to eat a really well balanced diet with whole grains, loads of veggies and stuff, and avoid the processed foods. And yet in the pet industry, it's like the other way around, which is totally confusing. So Jamie, as an avian vet who is seeing a lot of birds on pellets, what are the sort of health complications that you're seeing even on birds who are fed pellets, and what are the things that you're seeing most often in practice?
Yeah, I do see probably the biggest things. I see a lot of vitamin A deficiency. I see a lot of obesity. Those are kind of by and far the biggest things. I do see a lot of birds that still have like dry skin on pellets, which could be vitamin A, could also be an omega-3 deficiency. Pellets, they can't be meeting the needs of all of the, 350 plus species of parrots that we see with the same formula. I would say I probably see the most health issues with like cockatiels, budgies, and Amazons, but they might just be the most commonly kept birds too. But they do have a lot of vitamin A issues and a lot of obesity.
And Jason, we sort of touched upon like the isolates and things of the vitamins, but in these pellets, what is on the label isn't necessarily what's going to be on the bag, especially by the time you actually finish the bag. Some of these things in there are kind of unstable, aren't they?
Yes, and like Dr. Jamie just said, vitamin A and D3, sorry, not D3, omega 3s. Um, those are two of the most critical things we need to get into birds. And those are also the two things that really aren't stable when especially with these foods that can sit on a shelf for months at a time. I personally, knowing what I know about omega-3 fatty acids and their role in nervous system development, for example, I think this is a huge problem with citizens not getting omega-3s at an early age. So when I talk to people even about hand feeding formula, which is just basically crushed up pellets, if you really want to break it down, is we need to give them healthy fats that are not shelf stable because they are critical to nervous system development. And every time I see a bird that's plucking or that has some kind of behavior issue, I'm like, wonder if they would have that if that wasn't the case. Because we know that these things don't happen a lot in the wild where they're getting a fatty rich diet, you know. So it makes me wonder what's still there in the pellet after it's sit in a bag, because it's not just heat that denigrates a lot of these nutrients. It's just oxidation. It's just sitting there, you know, for a period of time. So um, you're not getting what the label says.
Mhm. Exactly. And it's really hard for consumers to know unless you actually know how compounds work and how they kind of degrade and stuff. There's no way of knowing. You're just trusting what's on the label. And yes, when it's produced, maybe everything is there in these certain levels. But again, how bioavailable are they? And are they going to be there by the time you've actually finished the end of the bag? And you mentioned the nervous system, and we know how important that is for all kind of processes in the body, and one of the big things that ties into that is the gut microbiome, and we've talked about that a lot in a lot of different videos because they do interlink. You know, gut health is kind of linked to mental health and everything else kind of combines and stuff. And when we look at things like pellets, there's no like roughage in there, there's no fibrous material which is going to feed kind of pre and probiotic stuff in the gut. If you guys are the experts, so I'm going to hand it over to you in a second. But is a pellet actually going to complement the gut microbiome? I actually saw a study a little while ago. I'm pretty sure it was on Quakers, and it was assessing the gut microbiome species between Quakers on an all seed diet and an all pelleted diet, and the species were totally different. And that does lead to the fact that actually maybe we do need to be looking at diversity to make sure there's a huge variety of different species in the gut to keep them healthy. So, Jason, take it away on gut microbiomes.
Well, I'm going to say this more than once. Seed is healthy. I think I'm going to say it again. Seed is healthy. When we look at our diets, you know, you see health foods. You go to a health food store and there's seeds for people because they are healthy. They have lots of benefits. But like Jamie said, they cannot be the predominant or the whole part of the diet. But seed is healthy. And what I see from people online is like sunflower seeds are the worst, the most demonic food on the planet. They're going to kill everything if they even look at them or if they're in the same room with them. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So all you have to do is Google what sunflower health benefits are, what the nutrient complement is, and you can see the amazing things that sunflower seed, for example, can bring. Should they have 18 sunflower seeds a day? No. Like any reasonable person should look at the diet and say, if it's diverse, they are not getting too much of any one thing. Now, that being said, seeds, nuts, veggies, things like that are all going to bring fiber and other things like healthy fats, um, certain carbohydrates and proteins that are going to fuel the microbiome, or at least fuel precursors to creating an environment where the microbiome in the gut is going to be healthier. And we've got preliminary studies right now on budgies and cockatiels that have shown us that just the addition of sprouted seed and sprouted seed and legumes caused a diversification in the microbiome, which is exactly what we want. And the microbiome in pretty much every organism on the planet's gut is, I should say all, right? All of every organism has a microbiome. But when it comes to the microbiome, it's an ecosystem. And an ecosystem has many different organisms and they all have a job. And that's how ecosystems balance. But when you take a species out, things tend to fall apart. And that's exactly what happens in our gut. And when you look at humans and you look at the obesity rates right now, and you look at heart disease and things like that, all of that probably has a very strong connection to the microbiome and how much the microbiome supports other body systems. So you're not going to get what you need for the microbiome from feeding a mostly pelleted diet. You're not going to get, well, you probably will get more from a seed diet, but you can't rely on one or the other alone. They need to have whole foods that provide a lot of fiber. Um, that's one reason why I only push a cold pressed pellet, because it's alfalfa based, and that's a great complete protein, great source of fiber, among other things. So if you want to feed that microbiome, you diversify the diet, because then you're feeding a lot of different nutrients, which are all going to feed one of those types of bacteria or fungi or whatever's in the gut that you need to be there.
Definitely. And Jamie, you said in our last video that feeding one type of food is going to affect the gut microbiome and have a less diverse kind of species profile in there. Do you see many kind of GI issues with birds? Is it linked to a certain type of diet? What's the kind of things that you're seeing in practice when it comes to GI issues?
GI issues are one of the most common things that I do see parrots that are sick with. It does seem like a lot of them are on basically a single food, whether it be all seeds or all pellets. Uh, the first thing I usually say is you have to feed veggies. You have to feed different types of veggies because it's not just that there's fiber, it's that there's different kinds of fiber. And when you have different types of fiber, you make a more robust microbiome and you're more likely to be able to, defend yourself against sort of bacterial pathogens that would set up shop. There's plenty of studies showing that if you don't have enough fiber in your diet, just in general, that your GI tract is not as healthy and that the wrong kind of bacteria can over-replicate very easily and make the gut, more susceptible to inflammation and disease in general. So it's really important to feed the different types of plants too, not just that they added fiber, because a lot of pet foods they add in like beet pulp or psyllium husk, which is great. It's better than it not being there, but that one kind of fiber does not create a robust microbiome. It might help a few species of, bacteria, but not all of them. So if you feed different things with really any animal, it doesn't matter if it's bird, cat, dog, you feed different things, you're going to get a more robust microbiome.
For sure. And we sort of talk about inflammation, and that really is one of the things that can be a precursor to a lot of health challenges. Jason, when we talk about inflammation, you've already kind of mentioned like omega-3s and omega-6s and balancing it out. What are some of the best ways for birds to access these kinds of things to reduce the likelihood of inflammation?
Yeah, getting them off of a ultra processed diet, processed pellet, and onto more whole food. Antioxidants and things like that that are present, those phytochemicals largely have a anti-inflammatory effect on tissue. And if you're feeding a diverse diet, like Dr. Jamie just said, you need many different things in order to satisfy those those needs. And before we came on, I was talking about interviewing a gorilla biologist, and they in zoos they have started to remove pellets from their diets because they have seen a lot of heart disease. And when they remove the pellet, they found a reduction in inflammation markers, and they spent more time foraging, which is exactly what our birds do. Our birds spend, what research says, 40 to 70% of their day on average foraging. And if you're just giving them one food in a bowl, they're done in a few minutes. And then what are they going to do the rest of the day? Right. So it's not just physiological needs, it's mental needs. Um, and we all know parrots are intelligent. So we need to satisfy those needs as well. But when it comes to inflammation, they need an omega-3 fatty acid in their diet. And you're not going to get that in a processed food. You're going to get that in certain seeds, some tree nuts. Um, and then even well preserved oils that are refrigerated. There's some sources that you can always supplement a little bit here and there, but definitely whole food. A walnut a day keeps the keeps the veterinarian away, right, Jamie?
Amazing. People are worried about fats and things. Maybe we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. But one of the other kind of silent things that seems to creep into diets as well is sugar. We'll often have a look at the back of a packet of pellets, and I highly recommend everybody to do that as well to work out what is actually, going into your bird. And one of the main ingredients very well could be sugar. But there is a difference between the kind of sugar that goes into pellets and the sugars that you'll find in fruit, because we're seeing a lot of content these days about how fruit is as terrible as seeds and that you should never feed fruits. So, Jamie, as a vet, what is your opinion on feeding fruit and also your opinion on these kind of hidden sugars in these pellets?
Yeah, well, feeding fruit is something that can and should be done, just to start. The sugars that are in fruit are different than the sugars that have been extracted and isolated and put into pellets to make them more palatable. The sugars in fruits, when they're running with the fiber that they're made with, essentially they don't spike glucose in the same way. And we can extrapolate that from people that wear like the CGM monitors, where we know like if they do eat, an apple, and or if they eat the same amount of equivalent sugar, their glucose will spike less when they eat that apple because of the fiber that it comes with. And a lot of the pellets, they do have sugar within the first three ingredients. Some of them get fancy and say, molasses or something like that, but it still is an isolated sugar. And often, first on the list is corn, and that's something the body, turns into sugar pretty easily. And we've bred corn to be higher and higher in sugar. So essentially there's sugar on multiple, spots on that pellet label, which probably does increase fat storage in those birds, which I've seen with quite a few cockatiels where I've had to limit or get rid of the pellets in their diet to help them actually lose weight, because they do just, they eat them like little potato chips, and some of them really like it. But it ultimately they still wind up with pretty significant health consequences. So,
Yeah. And
yeah.
a lot of people don't realize the link between things like sugar and fatty liver disease. Everyone thinks it's fat, and
Right.
that's why everybody freaks out about seeds and nuts. But actually, sometimes it's this silent sugar that goes hidden in all these different kind of treats and pellets and things that actually could be contributing. And people think, oh, I'm feeding this balanced, wonderful diet. Why is my bird still getting health problems? And it's really, you need to understand what you're actually putting into your bird and question things. It's okay to ask questions. And if you can't get the answer that meets your values, then you should be really thinking, is this actually where I want to go? And that's where, Jason, your wonderful Facebook group, which is going to be linked down in the description, is a great resource for people to explore diversifying the diet, because really fruit is not the enemy, just like seed isn't, is it? There are many different ways that we can feed fruits, even unripe fruits in some circumstances.
Yeah, so I, I can't stand when people hyper focus on like one thing, without looking at the forest for the trees, no pun intended. But when people look at something like an apple, and this is where certain influencers on social media are incredibly dangerous. And I'm going to say that very plainly because they can come out with a story, not even about a parrot, about a different type of bird who got diabetes. And they assumed, because their vet planted this seed in their head, that, oh, it died because we've engineered fruit to be sweeter. And so all that sugar killed their bird. I've bred similar species to this bird. I have an all fruit diet. I've never had any diabetes in my birds, because I'm feeding a diverse diet and I'm not feeding any pelleted foods to these birds. Now that being said, when you look at something like a blueberry, which is incredibly healthy, blueberries are incredibly healthy. When you look at a blueberry, you can say, oh, sugar, or a grape. Let's say a dark grape, and we hear sugar bombs and all this type of um, rhetoric. But when it comes to looking at the fruit as a whole, you have to see what else does this fruit bring. Now, like Jamie said, these things don't typically spike blood sugar levels because they are accompanied with all these other things, all these other compounds that come with them in the fruit. So that's why they don't typically do that. And when you look at something like a berry, you can't just say, oh, it's full of sugar. You need to say, well, it's got a dark color, which means there's probably bioflavonoids in play here, and those are really beneficial antioxidants. And it's probably got all kinds of other types of, organic compounds that are beneficial. So a piece of fruit I mean, plants produce fruit to entice animals to carry their seeds elsewhere and disperse them for them, since plants can't get up and move to reproduce. So the whole point of a fruit is that it's going to bring, it's going to attract animals, and they're going to bring, but it's got to make it worth it. It's got to make it worthwhile, and that's why these nutrients are in there. Even though humans have, selectively bred them to be sweeter, for example, they still have a ton of health benefits. They shouldn't be the whole diet. All fruit diet is just as bad as an all pellet diet, and it's just as bad as an all seed diet. An all anything diet is problematic. But to get rid of fruit because you've heard that there's too much sugar in there is really asinine. It's not true.
For sure. And when we bring new ideas to the table or different ways of thinking, a lot of people say, well, show me a study, show me the study. Like, I need to see the study in order for this to be a thing. And Jamie, I'm sure you'll agree, it's really difficult to create the kinds of studies that are going to tick all the boxes, so to speak, with a diverse diet because it's really hard with all those variables.
Yeah, I mean, one, you have to look at who's going to fund it, so that's challenging. But also, too, it's very variable how people do their diets too. If you're not portion controlling those diets, sometimes they still are not healthy. If you are feeding a wonderful diet, but you have, so much fruit in there that the bird can only eat that fruit, then you're still going to wind up with health issues. So yeah, you have to look at, really portion controlling things too, and trying to really make sure you are feeding enough diverse things to make it where the bird can and needs to actually eat all the items that you're putting in the diet. But yeah, it's hard to prove things study-wise because it is a very variable thing.
Definitely. And Jason, I'm sure you can agree, it's really hard sometimes to find unbiased research as well, especially when it comes to the actual funding, because it is so hard to find funding, isn't it?
I'm very familiar with not being able to find funding. That's just part of science. But when it comes to birds, it's even harder. Dog and cat, you can get a myriad of funding resources. Unfortunately, like you said, a lot of them are biased because pet food companies want to control the science, and they want to be able to tell customers that their food is, proven to be effective. And bias science is real. There's no question about it. When it comes to extrapolation, though, like extrapolation is what we do in science. And a lot of the things that are studied for humans are tested on model organisms. So there's people hear of lab rats and guinea pigs. Things are tested on them, and that's why we have we live longer now than we have, and we can treat diseases and things like that because of these model organisms. Um, but what we see can be extrapolated nutrition wise. And that's not a bad thing because you're not going to find um, an effective study on whether broccoli is good for blue and gold macaws. I mean, that's so oddly specific, but that's what some people want to change their mind, and that's a cop out. What you need to see what does this food item have in it, because that is going to go into my bird or whatever animal I'm feeding. And that is well studied. We know what's in broccoli. We know what's in grapes. We know what's in blueberries. Like we know that stuff. And so we extrapolate from what we do know and we apply it to other species and other, based on those animal models. And that's how science works. And so if somebody's pushing you on saying, well, there's no studies on parrots, I'm like, well, yeah, there's no studies on parrots that say what you're saying either. So it's just not how science works. So that extrapolation is everything.
Definitely. It's really tricky as well. And sometimes, you might have a paper, but when you actually read the paper, instead of just reading the abstract, you might see that the sample size is like four birds and they come
Yes.
from a terrible situation. It's like, well, how much can we actually trust this? Just because it's a published paper, so to speak, you actually need to read it. And, as Jason says a lot, it's a science illiterate society. Not everybody knows how to read a paper. I mean, you have all these AI tools now that can probably summarize it for you, but it just because there is a headline and things does not mean that that is a be all and end all. And things should be repeated if there is a study like that. Try it on different species because we know that there are going to be slight variations in what different species need. We know that macaws benefit from a slightly higher fat diet in comparison to others. Um, So I wanted to just kind of go on a slight tangent and then we'll get back on track just because there is a kind of a trending discussion at the moment. I wanted your guys' thoughts on it, which is the link between metabolizable energy and calories and the likelihood of hormonal behavior in parrots. And is that the be all and end all? Is that the major link between hormonal behavior? Jamie, did you have a thought on calories and metabolizable energy and hormones and what you're kind of seeing if birds come into the clinic who are hormonal?
Sure. Yeah, I do think it plays a role. You know, I we are in general, we suffer from too much calories versus too little most of the time in the pet industry, where animals do tend to get particularly heavy. And I do see a lot of birds that are very hormonal, and often those birds are on a diet where they do have an overabundance of, fats and sugars in their diet, but really just an overabundance of everything because they're fed a ton of different foods. And a lot of people also are feeding a lot of foods that they cook and are, warm and mushy. And most birds don't really come in contact with that kind of stuff unless their mate's feeding them that. And conversely, I do also see birds that are on like an all pellet diet and they don't want to feed their babies too if they have babies, because they aren't given that caloric surplus. So it kind of goes both way with birds, but if your objective is to keep a healthy pet and you don't want them to be hormonal, caloric surplus does seem to trigger hormonal behavior in birds, and that makes sense because when in the wild is there a caloric surplus? It's during the spring. It's when they're supposed to be hormonal. So I do think that that does play a role.
For sure. And Jason, what are your thoughts on that? And how can we utilize a raw whole food diet to reduce calories and that kind of thing, but also meeting what our birds need?
Yeah, and I think it's more than calories. Like Jamie said, the warm, mushy foods, cooked foods. No, no bird. I'm an advocate for no cooked foods,
Mhm.
no cooked foods at all. And I don't care if you say your bird loves this. Of course they love it. We like lots of things that are bad for us. So cooked food is problematic for a myriad of reasons, not just because it can stimulate hormones, but also because it goes cooked food spoils much faster at room temperature than whole foods do. So if you fed cooked rice for a long time, stop. They don't need it. You can soak and sprout rice, but there's also a lot of other better grains that you can soak and sprout very, very easily within 24 to 48 hours. So, there's really no reason to feed anything cooked. Um, Even sweet potatoes fine raw. It's not going to hurt your bird. It is one of the exceptions where there's more nutrient available if you lightly steam it, but they don't need cooked mushy food. I know the Association of Avian Veterinarians put out a thing last year like, don't feed warm, mushy foods because they're problematic because they cause hormonal issues, but it's more than that. It also has to do with spoilage and things like that. So between that and portion control, like Dr. Jamie said, on the back of my foods on my label, I have portion control diagrams so that everybody knows, and most people are shocked at how little you need to feed to satiate your bird. And most people make the same mistake in my experience. It's leaving some kind of food in there at all times just because. Um, Pellets or seed, you should never leave those in 24/7. I pull all food at bedtime so that I have control over what food they get in the morning when they're hungriest, and that should be fresh foods only. They don't see any dry foods until the evening after they've had plenty of access to fresh foods during the day. And then portion control. I use the tablespoon method, which I'm not going to go into right now, but 1 tablespoon for small birds, 2 tablespoons for medium birds, 3 tablespoons for large birds in the morning and in the evening, and diversify the diet so that that they're eating the diversity that you want.
Definitely. And, it feels difficult, but it doesn't have to be. But sometimes we want to make it easier for ourselves. And maybe we feed our birds some of the things that maybe we eat. Maybe it's the rice, maybe it's pasta, maybe it's bread, maybe it's chicken and chicken bones, maybe it's eggs. And we're seeing a lot of this and we're seeing other places promoting this. But Jamie, as an avian vet, should our parrots be eating bread, chicken, chicken bones, pastas, rice, that kind of stuff, all cooked, obviously?
No, they really shouldn't. I do hear a lot of that too, and sometimes I pick my battles, but in general, parrots shouldn't be eating chicken bones. They don't have any need for that. And also it's dangerous. If just like if you gave your dog chicken bones, if they ate shards of that, that could definitely cause huge issues. Basically, I don't see any benefit besides the fact that the bird likes to do it, but you can find other things that your bird likes to do. I mean, we all like to eat things that are bad for us, but we don't need to extend that to our parrots. And also, just the size of what we offer them is huge. I mean, especially if we're talking about, an Amazon that maybe needs 4 to 6 tablespoons of food a day total, and we're offering them, a pizza crust, or a chicken bone. Like that is a lot of their diet for that day. And what are we looking for them to be getting from that? I mean, they're just getting calories, carbs, sugar, or just straight up fat if we're eating the bone marrow. Um, Also, it depends if that chicken was healthy. Does that marrow actually have stuff in it that the bird should even have? But yeah, in general, no, they shouldn't be eating that. There's no real health benefit, and there's other things you can do to enrich their diet that gives them diversity other than feeding them something that's bad for them, that's taking up a large portion of their caloric needs for that day.
Definitely, and we need to be thinking about things like cholesterol and these unnatural foods and the risk of atherosclerosis and all
Yeah.
different kinds of things when, we are feeding these unnatural foods into our birds. And Jason, you've said before, people say food is love and we want to share all of our yummies with our birds and stuff, but there are other healthier ways of doing that, especially healthier proteins as well, rather than, people say they feed things like chicken and stuff because of the protein. What are the other ways that we can show our birds love in a healthier way?
Yeah, I was attacked on Facebook, big surprise, because I said birds don't need all of these unhealthy things. And someone said, well, I would hate to be your bird. How boring. And I'm like, my birds are all healthy and thriving because they get a diverse diet of all kinds of healthy things because there's tons of healthy things. I think the pizza crust chicken bone thing is more for humans. I think it's more for us to feel better about what we're doing with our birds, but it's actually doing harm and it's long-term harm. Um, Compared to us. We're big organisms compared to a bird that has a very small body mass. So whatever we feed them has a huge impact on them compared to us who are bigger body mass, animals. So when it comes to um, offering these things that are just unnecessary, um, there's plenty of ways to get protein into your bird. It's in seeds, it's in nuts, it's in soaked and sprouted legumes. There's all kinds of healthy ways to get proteins, but there's proteins in plants. There's plant proteins, and that's probably what most parrots have evolved to eat, as well as insects. And another thing that we have to get over as people is that, mealworms are disgusting and gross. You may not like them, but most birds, most parrots that I've introduced mealworms to eat them like they've eaten them their whole life, like they just instinctively know what to do. And when you talk to researchers who are out in the field, they see parrots eat bugs, especially extract larvae from tree bark and things like that all the time. So it's no secret. What we don't see all over the place is all these different parrot species, um, eating a carcass, eating a dead animal. We don't see that. Has it been witnessed? Yes, but very specific instances and not widespread part of the diet. So don't justify feeding unhealthy foods because you've heard that birds do it in the wild. It's usually not true.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't have to feel mealworms. If you're afraid of mealworms, that's fine. There are other ways of doing it, like the soaked and sprouted. I mean,
Mhm.
we have a lot of inverts here. We have like 30 tarantulas and stuff, so there's always a surplus of mealworms. So we give it to our guys. The conures take to them better than the cockatiels.
Mhm.
But it is funny to, watch them actually explore this kind of natural food and give them that opportunity as well, especially when you actually feed your mealworms as well and look after them. That's a whole other tangent that we're not going to go on now. Um, but just to kind of bring back to seed, because I know that this is a really important topic. Jamie, as an avian vet, is it okay for a parrot to have some seed as part of the diet?
Yes. Yeah,
Good.
it definitely is. I usually do tell people to use that as part of their when they're doing training with their bird too, especially like use the seeds for that. It's high value, and there are some benefits to getting seeds. There's, I mean, the omega-3 supplement that I recommend. I mean, it's a seed-based omega-3 supplement. I mean, it's like flax, sunflower, and I think safflower blend too. So yeah, there's definitely benefits to seed. It just can't be their whole diet.
For sure. And Jason, fat is essential for some bodily functions, isn't it? So we do actually need to have some fat. And again, going back to looking on what's in the packet of the pellets, if you continue to feed them, that there's probably going to be some kind of seed in that pellets, because what else are pellets going to be made of? They're not made out of this mystery material. They are made out of certain things, and that can be seeds, but we do actually need some fat in the diet, don't we?
Yeah, that's the hypocrisy that really drives me crazy is, oh, feed don't feed seeds, feed our pellets. And yet there's seed in the first five ingredients in the pellets, or peanuts for crying out loud. Um, it drives me insane. But when you look at seeds and fat, like there's so every cell in the animal body is covered in a membrane, and then has two layers of fats. So that alone, those fats control what comes in and out of cells. When we need to nourish cells, it allows nutrients in, it balances water. I mean, it does all this amazing stuff, but it's fat. So we do need fat for a host of different reasons. You need fat to absorb your fat soluble vitamins. I mean, fat is not a bad word. Too much fat is problematic, and just like too much sugar is problematic. Sugar, even particularly table sugar, which is what you would find in pellets, um, is converted to fat in the liver in a process called lipogenesis. So there that's why fatty liver is so common in so many birds, and it's not because they're on an all seed diet necessarily. It could be that they're eating mostly pellets, like Jamie just said with the cockatiel she's seeing. So um, the idea that 70 or 80% of the diet needs to be this one food is causing problems and is unnecessary. You need to reduce that and diversify with whole foods, because we all know that any reasonable person knows that whole foods are more beneficial than processed foods, period. We know that. Any medical doctor is going to tell you that for your own health. It goes for any animal that you're keeping as well.
Definitely. And Jamie, I'm sure, you will absolutely agree that vegetables and chop-based mixes are essential for any parrot to have in their diet, a variety of veggies. But it can be hard to get our birds to eat these veggies because they're maybe not as desirable as some of these other things, like your seeds, maybe like your pellets as well. What are your kind of things that you recommend to people to get them to try their birds with veggies?
Yeah, no, I recommend all sorts of different ways to start. And it's very bird specific too. Like it's going to depend on your bird as to what they like. I've seen some birds that only start eating veggies when greens were, draped over the top of their cage or put through the cage bars. When I was a kid, I had a pair of budgies that would only eat their greens if it was in their bath container. But I was like, fine, whatever works. Some is better than none. I really do like sprouting too for the ones that are little seed junkies because then it still kind of looks like a seed and they're getting a whole plant and that really changes the whole nutrient profile of it too. But just keep trying. I mean, some birds like it and present it as like a toy where you can put it on those little birdie kebab skewers. Some birds like it if you just make a chop mix that they can't pick the little ingredients out, but you sprinkle some seeds over it or you put the seeds deeper in there to make them forage for it. But I do think also that the fresh food timing is important too. Like Jason was saying, offering it in the morning when the birds are hungry makes sense, to encourage them to really start to eat it. I've even had people take little, just to start, even if it's something like banana, roll it through seeds just to get them to try something, just get them used to a novel food. But start anywhere and just keep offering it because these birds are not eating very much food. I mean, if it's a cockatiel, you're talking what, 2, 3 tablespoons of food a day. You can waste a tablespoon of veggies a day. Like that's not going to break the bank for pretty much anyone. So just keep trying different ways. They're very, very visual animals and they see more color spectrum than we do. So sometimes they're just like, that didn't look right. So just keep trying different ways.
Definitely. And, really, people need to start understanding what's in food, whether that's fresh food or whether that's formulated food, what is actually in it, what are the different vitamins and minerals and stuff. And Jason, you have your fabulous avian nutrition courses on Team Thrive at the moment, where people can actually understand what is in food. How important is that for people to start understanding, not only for their birds' health, but for their health as well?
Yeah, I think that it's shocking how little we are taught through our schooling about food because we eat it every day. Like that's kind of terrifying to me. So, when I started the Team Thrive program, I didn't have courses. This came out of a necessity. People were asking, like, can you teach us where to get proteins? Can you teach us how to get, healthy fats? So when I started the two, and I've got two courses on there now, which are part of the Team Thrive membership program. Um, it was just shocking that people are like, wait, that's a berry? Like melons are berries? That's crazy, and that type of thing. But when you start to associate those foods with ones that then you're like, oh, okay, this makes better sense that these nutrients are in have they have this in common with these other foods that I know. So it helps people make better choices. And when they say feed the rainbow, that's a great way to approach going to the grocery store, but it's not going to tell you exactly like what benefits all of these different foods have. So I definitely recommend you know, Googling, and don't rely on the AI thing that comes at the top of Google because it's often wrong. It just pulls information from random sources. What you want is really take a deep dive into what does squash have? Why is squash this color? What does it have in it that is beneficial for me and my birds to eat? Um, and then keeping birds as a scientific experiment that never ends. I say that all the time. And what Jamie just said is you got to try different ways. I know cockatiels that will only eat shredded veg on a plate on the bottom of their cage because they're grazers. But I know others that love a whole kale leaf hung in their cage so they can pick at it. You just got to try different things, but you can't give up. Any bird will eat what you want it to. You got to keep trying and experiment a bit, and be persistent. They need time. They might be afraid of something the first time you put it in the cage, but having an understanding on why is kale better than romaine lettuce, for example, you can kind of look at them and tell they're different and that one is more darker and richer. And a lot of it has to do with color, like Dr. Jamie also said, seeing those birds see these colors in much different ways than we do. So, just keep experimenting and try, but learn about what's in these foods because it'll help you make better choices, especially when it comes to fiber.
Absolutely. And we say when we talk about sort of diet conversion, I have a whole video on here of how to get your bird to eat veggies. We have the three P's. So we have patience, perseverance, and presentation. They're like the three P's for us when it comes to actually getting your bird to try things. A great example with my flock is my cockatiel fish has taken 6 years to eat bell peppers. He loves all kinds of other things, but he hasn't really liked those until now. It was a massive shock to me. I was like, why is your beak red? What, are you okay? He's like, yeah, I'm just enjoying my peppers. And then one of my conures, Olive, has decided that she now likes pine nuts after 5 years. Again, just keep offering it, because there is going to be wastage. It's part of their biology. It's how they propagate the rainforest. It's it's
Yes.
it's going to happen. And in this economy, we don't want to be wasting money, but that's part of the fun of having parrots is your money is going down the toilet. Um, so that's it's just part and parcel of getting a bird to eat healthy. And I know that there are going to be people watching this saying, well, I'm still going to feed some pellets, because I want to fill in those gaps, or I don't feel ready, or I've seen all this fear-mongering marketing. I still want to feed some pellets. That's okay. That's your choice. We're not here to tell you what to do. We're here to give you information and you can take that how you like. But if you are going to continue feeding that kind of item in your bird's diet, we do still want to diversify some of the diet. And one of the best ways of that, as Jamie said, is soaking and sprouting. So, Jamie, could you tell us a little bit more about why you think that soaking and sprouting is so beneficial for birds?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, you're making their seed into a plant, and that is changing the nutrient profile of that seed. You're also offering some diversity, assuming you're not just soaking a single seed, and you're using a sprouting mix. So you're getting a lot of different plants in there. It is also offering more enrichment too, so it's not just the same thing that they're looking at. But yeah, just it really just changes the nutrient profile of that seed, and it's a really good way to get more vitamin A in your bird's diet too, because a lot of sprouts have a fair amount of vitamin A, which is what a lot of birds are missing, regardless of what diet type they're on. But yeah, no, it's just a really good way to introduce plants to your bird if they aren't familiar with them, and even if they are.
Yeah, for sure. And Jason, we don't have to just stop at things like soaking sprouting. We've got microgreens, we've got teas, we've got foraging blends, especially those from Biodiversity Bird Blends. Again, all the info is going to be down below in case
Shameless plug.
we do love to promote our friends, and we do sell them here in the UK as well. We've got all different kinds of things, no matter where you are in the world. But we do want to be exploring other ways, especially with dry foraging as well, don't we? It's not just the fresh stuff. There's loads of dry options for our birds to increase the diversity in that sort of evening meal as well.
Yes, and I'll echo what Dr. Jamie said about soaking and sprouting. I think that's one of the most valuable, easy things that anybody can do. I have clients who have 5 or 6 year old kids who love to sprout for their birds. It's just that easy. Growing microgreens beyond that is also easy. You can get microgreen kits that are very easy to use. And those are very nutrient dense. You can really get a lot more bang for your buck in those tiny little nutrient dense leaves than the adult plant sometimes. So, those are all options that you can do right in your kitchen windowsill. You don't need space to grow things. When it comes to dry foraging, I think dried flowers, dried greens, things like that, in addition to some seeds, some tree nuts, um, freeze dried, different types of freeze dried fruit and veggies and things like that, all beneficial. The more you can diversify, the better. Portion control is everything, though. You have to make sure that you're not giving them, a parrotlet does not need 2 cups of food in its cage at all time. You don't have to worry about it starving. It's not going to starve. Pull food at bedtime. They're not going to get up in the middle of the night for a midnight snack. That birds shut off. They're done. Until the light comes out, and then you give them fresh food in the morning. They don't need, that constant food. But if you want them foraging, um, you got to give them a lot of different things, and then you got to present in different ways. I love foraging boxes. The foraging type things that you can buy. I think every bird should have a skewer. A stainless steel skewer will last the lifetime of your bird. Just get a skewer and throw some things, different things on it. It literally takes seconds to do every day. So keep your bird occupied for a while. Baffle cages, another one. Anything you can stuff. But definitely you want to keep your bird engaged as much as possible.
For sure. So we're going to round things off now because I've been taking up too much of your guys' very generous time. But to kind of finish the video, I was hoping that you would both maybe give some kind of key messages to anyone watching who is thinking about, what should I do? How can I improve my diet? Basically, what message would you like to send to the world? Jamie, would you like to start and speak to everybody about what kind of messages you'd like to speak on nutrition?
The big thing is there's no shortcut for eating your veggies. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. There's really no shortcut. The secret ingredient in broccoli is broccoli. Like you actually have to eat it. But just keep trying. Don't be discouraged. I mean, birds are very fussy because we haven't exposed them to enough things. So just keep trying different ways of offering foods, and some is better than none. It would be great to get everybody on a full chop diverse diet, and that is the goal. But starting somewhere is fine. Starting with they ate, a little bit of carrot today. Great. Fantastic. Just start somewhere and don't get discouraged, but there's no substitute for eating your veggies.
For sure. And Jason, what would you like to share with the world?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna echo that too. Some is better than none. I think in behavior and training, there's successive approximations, right? You can move animals in steps to get them to do certain behaviors. It's exactly what we're doing with nutrition. I think you can find things that you can just soak, rinse, and feed. And then once you feel comfortable with that, you can graduate to sprouting, which is just letting those seeds grow another 12 to 24 hours maybe. And then you can maybe graduate to growing microgreens by putting them in some soil and letting them grow and then clipping them and feeding to your birds. There's these little steps that you can take when you're comfortable, but it doesn't matter how busy you are. You can always diversify the diet in meaningful ways, even if it takes, once a week you do an hour of food prep so that you have everything you need for the week for your birds, whatever it takes, but come up with a system, and start wherever you're comfortable, and then really push yourself to graduate to those, better, bigger and better things.
Definitely. So I think that the key word for this video is just start. Start.
Yes.
Start somewhere, start anywhere, but start. And to leave loads of resources down in the description for you guys to check out. There'll be various YouTube links, there will be Jason's store as well, and Team Thrive, and lots of other things. Jamie's lovely vet clinic as well. You can go and check that out if you're local. Highly recommend. But do go and check out these resources to kind of research further, and always ask questions as well when you are looking at anything in the diet. Why is it like this, and why is this good or bad for my bird? But I'd like to say a massive thank you to Jason and Jamie for donating their time today to the channel to spread some really good messages about parrot nutrition. I hope you guys have enjoyed watching today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.